All right, well, Shabbat Shalom. Uh-oh. I'm doing something I haven't done in many years. And that's, I've got a cheat sheet here on my iPad. But anyway, yeah, it's nice to be back. I was all geared up to go over in that room. That's why I wore blue jeans and I didn't wear my coat. And look what y'all did to me. So anyway, do what? Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, I did that because I had to. I was going to wear a regular guy tie, and my wife made me wear those, the bow tie thing. Anyway, yeah, I don't like that picture, by the way, so. Because every time I see a picture of myself, I'm like, you know, something like that. All right, well, how's everybody doing today? Very well, very well. Well, there's so many things I want to talk about. There are a lot of things going on in our life. That is, my family and I, there's a lot of things happening. Some of them, as they're happening, Beth and I are looking at one another, scratching our heads, and we're like, how and what are we doing here? Well, how did this happen? Some of them are kind of scary, to be quite frank. But maybe as we go into the afternoon and evening, we'll talk about some of those things. But what I want to do is I want to go to Luke chapter 5. And I don't know if everyone was studying the same Torah portion, but if you are on the same cycle of reading the Torah that I am, this week's Torah portion is called Metzorah. And Metzorah refers to the person who has been afflicted with zarat, which in our Bibles is typically translated as leprosy. And I'm sure that most of you have already heard, probably by now, that what you and I regard as leprosy today is probably not what the Bible was referring to with the zarat. And I won't go into all the reasons why. That's not really what I'm going to teach about today. But just, you know, a few little bullet points. What you and I refer to as leprosy today is believed to be caused by some bacteria that's introduced into the body through the respiratory system. And then it creates havoc or wreaks havoc on the central nervous system. There's deterioration of tissue, which leads to people losing digits and even limbs in some extreme cases. When you read about what the Bible describes as the zarat, none of that is mentioned. All it talks about is how that when someone comes to the priest, if they have a red place in their skin, if it continues to grow and it turns white and the hair in the midst of the sore turns white, then that person is pronounced as being a metzorah, or someone who's been afflicted with the zarat. But a lot of teaching emphasizes that the zarat, or if you will, leprosy of the Bible, was not some physical condition as much as it was a physical manifestation of a spiritual issue. In other words, it was something that was going on inside that person, their soul and their heart. And because it had deteriorated and it had soured so deeply then that person, that it began to manifest in their physical body. And that was the Creator's way of trying to provoke that person to turn their hearts back to Him and be cleansed of their zarat, or their leprosy. In other words, it was a spiritual problem and therefore could not be remedied through physical means. It had to be a spiritual remedy. In other words, God was the only one who could really cleanse someone from their zarat. So, without getting too far into that, what I want to read to you is in Luke chapter 5, and this is describing a person who apparently had the zarat, or the leprosy. By the way, since they brought the board over here, let's do this real quick. This is the Hebrew word zarat, which is translated most of the time for us as leprosy. But here's what's interesting about this word. At the heart of the word is this Hebrew word, ra, which is the Hebrew word for evil or wickedness. So the idea is just to underscore the notion that the zarat, or the biblical leprosy, again, was a physical manifestation of a spiritual problem. The real issue was what was going on in the heart. And what was going on in the heart is ra, is evil, is wickedness. And so that physical malady was the Creator's way of putting pressure on that person to see, kind of squeezing them to the point that what was on the inside was erupting and beginning to show up on the outside. It'd be like a volcano. After a while, all that pressure builds up and it's got to go somewhere, and so that volcano will erupt and all the magma and the lava and everything flows out. Well, apples and oranges, I realize, but the same idea. The corruption that was on the inside had just gotten to such a degree that it had to come bubbling to the surface, erupting in their skin. So that's the idea. So in Luke chapter 5, verse 12, and it happened when he was in a certain city that, behold, a man who was full of leprosy, or zarat, saw Yeshua, and he fell on his face and implored him, saying, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Then he put out his hand and he touched him, saying, I am willing, be cleansed. Immediately the leprosy, or the zarat, left him, and he charged him to tell no one. Now I want to stop right there and say a couple of things. The first thing I want to notice, or want you to notice, is that this person, if he has this zarat, if he has this affliction that is manifesting the corruption that was in his heart, if that was the issue, then the only remedy is a spiritual one. That's why you don't go to the physician and be healed of this. That's why you have to go to the great physician to be healed of this. And so he comes to the Messiah and he implores him. He's falling down on his face. And what do we see in that? We see despair. But I also can see in that, at least implied in that, is a repentant heart. A heart that wants to change. A heart that wants to turn back to the Creator. And so he falls on his face and he implores him and he says, if you're willing, you can heal me. You're the one that can change my life. And then I want you to notice what the Messiah said. I am willing. And to me, that speaks of hope in any kind of a situation. And so I'm going to kind of make a hard right here and go into something that we're going to talk about in a little bit more detail. If it's true for a person, is it possible that the same is true for a nation? In other words, if a nation falls on its face and implores the Most High, saying, if you're willing, you can heal us. Is he willing? And would he do it? Well, here's what he said. If my people, which are called by my name, if they would humble themselves, if they would seek my face and pray, and if they would turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven. I'll forgive their sin, and I will heal their land. And I realize that that verse comes to us in the context of Solomon dedicating the temple, imploring God to hear your people when they cry out to you from this place. And he says, I'm going to hear them, and in times in the future, if they will humble themselves, seek my face and pray, etc. I realize that it's the context is speaking of Israel, but I want to suggest to you that if we can take that principle, that concept, and we can apply it to his people wherever they may be. So this is the question I have. If there were enough of us who truly humbled ourselves, fell on our face, implored the Most High, if you're willing, you can heal us, I wonder what he would say. Now it says in verse 14, he charged him to tell no one. Now this is a totally different topic. I'll just kind of throw this out for your consideration, no extra charge. But there are a lot of ministers through the years who have taken that verse when he says he charged him to tell no one, as to say that Yeshua didn't want anybody to know that he was the Messiah. I've heard that preached a lot. I've heard that taught a lot. And actually, nothing could be further from the truth. Because here's what he went on to say. But go and show yourself to the priest and make an offering for your cleansing as a testimony to them, just as Moses commanded. And so the question is, who are the them? Well, if he's going to offer the gift that Moses prescribed for the cleansing of a leper, that means he's got to go to the temple. Because according to the Torah, only a priest can pronounce someone unclean with the zorat, and only a priest can pronounce someone clean or cleansed from the zorat. So he's already had to appear before a priest sometime before who pronounced him unclean, and by the way, that put him outside the camp. He couldn't come in contact with anyone or anything considered to be set apart. He was a walking dead man, really. So now he's got to go back to the priest and appear before him, which means he's got to go to Jerusalem. Now this is taking place up in the Galilee, and that's 2,000 years ago. That's a long way. So he's got to make a trek. He's got to go to Jerusalem. He's got to go up to the temple, and he has to appear before the priests and then offer the gift that Moses had prescribed. Now here's something you may or may not know. According to Jewish tradition, no Israeli male had ever made that presentation. No one had ever offered the gift that Moses had prescribed for the cleansing of a leper. In fact, you can see where the Messiah talks about that in the days of Elijah. You know, there were many lepers in Israel during that time, but not one of them was cleansed, only Naaman the Syrian. And then, of course, Miriam, she was stricken with leprosy. But the point is, according to tradition anyway, no Israeli male had ever been certified as being cleansed from zarat or leprosy, and consequently had not offered that gift. Meaning this, they thought that should be interpreted to mean that only the Messiah would be able to cleanse someone from leprosy, from the zarat. In other words, if a man ever showed up in the temple to offer the gift that Moses had prescribed for the cleansing of a leper, that would be a sign that the Messiah was among them. And so he says, don't tell anyone, but I want you to go to Jerusalem. I want you to go offer the gift that Moses prescribed as a testimony to them. And the next thing you see, reading the Gospels, there's a lot of people coming up from Jerusalem to the Galilee to start checking him out to see what he's saying and what is he doing. Which leads me to my next point. What did the religious leaders of his day at large, what did they say about his ministry? Did they regard him as the Messiah? They did not. Most of the people that accepted him and recognized him as the Messiah were just Joe Average and Susie Q, right? All right. My point that I'm wanting to make here today, or what I want to get into today, is that I believe that if we were to humble ourselves, that the Messiah is willing to heal us. Individually, fellowship, community, I even believe a nation. And I know that there are some people who've given up on the nation. They've just said, you know, we're done, we're toast, we've gone too far, we've butchered too many babies. True. We've legalized same-sex marriage. We've got all these transgender issues that, you know, we have to make sure we say the right pronoun, or we might get called into court or something like that. We've just gone too far. And I know that a lot of people think that, well, it's over for us. We are a corrupt society, and we have been for some time, but that corruption that's in the soul of the nation is now erupting, and it's becoming manifest everywhere you look. I guess what I'm trying to say here is that as a nation, we are metzorah. We're afflicted with this condition that is not a physical malady. It's not a physical condition. Yeah, it manifests in the physical world, whether it's the financial world, whether it's, society, culture, pop culture, all these different things that are going on. It is a manifestation not of a physical problem. Our problems are not immigration. Our problems are not the economy. Our problems are not all of the different topics of the day. Those are manifestations of the problem. The problem is in the soul of the nation. And the corruption that's inside is now erupting, and it's becoming manifest. And before long, you have to be put outside the community, so to speak. So, a lot of people are just ready to say, in America, you're a walking dead man, unclean. But I want to remember what this guy said in Luke chapter 5. When he put his face on the ground and he implored him, he said, if you're willing, you can heal me. And he said, I'm willing. I wrote an article here a couple of weeks ago, and the essence of the article was this. David got into some trouble. He had a relationship with Bathsheba. She got pregnant. David tried to cover it up. Tried to get Uriah the Hittite, the woman's husband, to go into her. He refused. David had him killed, more or less. Nathan the prophet goes to him. God saw what you did, and you're going to pay a price for this. That child is not going to live. And when the child was born, he was very sickly. And he lingered for 7 days. But all those 7 days, David, even though he's already heard God's decision on this, David went in to a room and he fasted. And he didn't wash. And he lay on the floor and he implored God for mercy. Now the baby did die. The child did die. And when David's servants told him that the child had died, he got up, he went and he bathed, he sat down and he asked for a meal to be brought. And they were just amazed. For 7 days you've been on the floor, you haven't eaten, you haven't washed, and now the baby is dead and you're going to have a meal. And his response was this: while the child was still alive, I gave it all I had. Even though God had said certain things, I gave it all I had. I just continued to implore and ask him for mercy, thinking that maybe he might be gracious unto me. And he did that until he got a definite answer. Do you hear what I'm saying? The child is very, very sick. And we may be teetering on the brink of God allowing our choices to reap what we have sown. But then there's always the chance that if we humble ourselves truly, not just in word but in deed, if our hearts are broken before him and we fall on our face and we implore and say, if you're willing, you can heal us, will he do it? Hezekiah got a death sentence. Isaiah went into his house and said, get your house in order, you're going to die. Hezekiah turned to the wall, began to weep, began to call out to God, and before Isaiah could find his way back out into the street, God spoke to him and said, I've heard Hezekiah's prayer, turn around, go back in there and tell him I'm giving him 15 more years to live. You see, you just never know. David got an answer that he didn't really want. The answer was no. But sometimes the answer is yes. And I'll suggest to you that there's two things at work here. Number one, what are God's purposes? Number two, maybe the Creator allows certain things to run their course to see just how serious his people are about returning to him. If the Zorat, if the leprosy was God's way of speaking to that person about the condition of their heart and allowing it to be manifest in their physical body, maybe that was God's way of trying to provoke them to turn to him. And you know, how How hard-hearted are you? Are you going to continue down this road even though you've been afflicted this way? And by the way, you can read in the book of Leviticus, I think it's in chapter 12 or 13, that when the red sore, as it turns white, he's pronounced unclean. But if that person turns white from head to toe, he's pronounced clean. Did you ever read that? Did you ever notice that? It starts out red, and then it turns white, unclean. That's zorat. That's the leprosy. The person has to be segregated. But if that person continues to worsen to the point that he is covered head to toe and it's all white, then the priest pronounce him clean. Why is that? You would think that he's really bad, but he pronounces him clean. Well, if it's not a contagious disease in the sense it's not some physical bacteria that he spreads, but it's a condition of the heart, it's like God saying, you've hardened your heart so much, there's nothing else I can do to you. In fact, you go read in Isaiah, well, let me just turn over there. Are y'all with me here? I'm just establishing the introduction right now. We haven't gotten to the message. Seriously. Hope you're not planning to be anywhere right now. All right, look with me in Isaiah chapter 1. Verse 4. Alas, sinful nation, a people laden with iniquity, a brood of evildoers, children who are corrupters. They have forsaken the Lord. They have provoked to anger the Holy One of Israel. They have turned away backward. Could that describe our nation? 3 of you think so. What about the rest of you? All right. Why should you be stricken again? Why should you be stricken again? Here's what that says to me. Why should I do any more to you? You will revolt more and more. Years ago, when Alan was probably about 4 or 5, I mean, Alan is a black and white person. If you've ever met Alan, he is cut and dry. He is focused. He is, everything needs to be in order. Everything has to be in place. And he can be quite stubborn. And when he was about 4 or 5, I'll boil it down for you. I got to the point where I told Beth, I said, I'm afraid that I can't keep spanking this kid. I'm going to have to stop, because if I spank him, he just gets worse and he digs in his heels, and I'm afraid I'm going to kill this kid. Some of you parents know what I'm talking about, right? I couldn't spank him or threaten him with a spanking to the point that that got the desired result. He was just totally different. He would dig in his heels even more and more, to the point I truly was afraid I got to stop, because he's ticking me off and this isn't going to go well. So I had to get creative how to discipline this kid. All right, so if you can take that and apply it to this situation here, the Creator seems to be saying to Israel, if I strike you anymore, you're just going to revolt more and more. In fact, he goes on and he says, the whole head is sick and the whole heart faints. From the sole of the foot even to the head, there is no soundness in it, but wounds and bruises and putrefying sores. They have not been closed or bound up or soothed with ointment. He's describing these people as being laden with iniquity, and they're full of sores from head to toe, and I can't do anything else with you. You're just going to revolt and rebel against me even more so. Are you following me here? So it's in that context that he says this in verse 18, come now and let us reason together, says the Lord. Though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Though they are red like crimson, they shall be as wool. Now we've always read that, or I've always heard that taught, that our sins are red, and when we come to Him and repent, it becomes like snow. We're purified. But I want to remind you of how the Zorat starts out. Red, and then it turns white, And what does that symbolize? That the person's condition is worsening. And if it gets so bad that the person is white from head to toe, there's nothing else the Creator can do with this person. They have hardened their hearts so much. So might it be that we've been reading this or interpreting this the opposite of the way it should be understood? I will leave that for you to ponder. But here's what I'm saying. The Creator is always willing to forgive and to restore. That is His heart. That is His nature. Those are His attributes in Exodus chapter 34. I'll paraphrase it for the sake of time. After the golden calf incident, when the children of Israel, they say to Aaron, we don't know what was become of Moses, you're going to build us a golden calf. And when he fashions the golden calf, they say, God, O Israel, that brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And they begin to revel, they begin to worship this image that's supposed to represent the God that Moses is speaking to on the mountain. And so when Moses comes down, you know what happened there. He broke the tablets of the law. He made them drink. Thousands died that day. The point is that their heart revealed, or their mouths revealed and their actions revealed, that it was full of wickedness. But after that, even when God was ready to wipe them out, remember what He told Moses: step aside. I'll wipe them out and I'll raise up a nation from you. And what did Moses do? He stood in the gap. Listen to what I'm saying. The nation was as good as dead. God had already said, I'm going to wipe them out. I'm going to raise up a nation from you. But what did Moses do? If you do that, then all the other nations are going to say that you couldn't deliver them. And if you blot them out, blot me out too. Might it be that all of that was designed to bring Moses to that place of being willing to step in the gap on behalf of the nation? Maybe it's designed to see who among my people are willing to stand in the gap for a nation that I'm ready to wipe off the face of the earth. Speaking of Alan, he shares my love of history. And several years ago, I got to check off something that was on my bucket list. I got to go to the little Bighorn battlefield in Montana. From when I was a kid, I would look at maps of national parks and historical sites, and I'd circle them, you know, and I would just daydream about being able to go to those different places. And Little Bighorn was one of those places I always wanted to go. I don't know, some of you are looking at me like you're weird, but anyway, that's who I am. So a few years ago, probably 8 years ago, we got to go to the Little Bighorn battlefield. Now, my wife and Allison are as interested in the battlefield as, you know, eating glass. You know, I mean, they're just not all that interested. But Alan and I will get out on that battlefield and we'll walk it and we'll read every marker, we'll read every sign, and I think he does this too. I know I do. I kind of relive in my mind, or I try to imagine it in my mind what's going on. In this particular battle, of course, to get ready for this, to make the experience what I wanted it to be, I went back and read all my books on Custer and that battle and all the things that led up to it and all the things that happened afterwards, so I could be fresh, have all that information fresh in my mind when I'm walking out there on the battlefield. And here's the thing that really stuck with me about that experience. And Custer, you see, was one of those, he was a very ambitious man. And in fact, a lot of people don't realize that Custer was thinking about running for president in his near future. And one of the reasons that he wanted to win that particular battle there is because he wanted to use that as a launching board for a presidential campaign. So here's my point. He's going along, he's proud, he's arrogant, he's done this before, he's using the same kind of tactics that he's used in times past, but he's got his mind so focused on what he thinks is going to happen in the future that he didn't really pay attention to the 5,000 Cheyenne and Sioux warriors that were running up the hill after him. Here's my point to you, to us. Sometimes, particularly among believers, when we consider the state of our nation here and we look at what the Bible describes is going to happen in the future, sometimes it's easy for us to say, well, we're going to go into the kingdom. He's going to gather us back to Jerusalem. This is all going to come crashing down anyway, so just let it all crash down and we'll just go to the kingdom. Well, that works out well for you. But what about the millions of people out here that don't have any clue what's getting ready to happen? And then take that thought and couple it with this one. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever should believe in him should not perish but have everlasting life. My question would then be, is the Creator concerned about those people out there? Or is he so fixated on destroying this nation? Which do you think it is? While you're thinking all that, in Exodus chapter 34, after the golden calf incident, after he's ready to wipe them out, and Moses stands in the gap, he says, okay, Moses, I'm going to go with you. I'm going to go with this people. You hew 2 stones, bring it up to me, and I'll write the words of the covenant on them as before. And when Moses brought those 2 stones for God to write with his fiery finger the words of his law, he said, the Lord, he is abundant in goodness and truth. He's compassionate. He's merciful. He's long-suffering. Yes, the guilty will not be cleared. They will be punished. He'll visit the iniquity upon the children, on those who commit iniquity to the 3rd and the 4th generation. But he extends mercy to those who love him and who keep his commandments unto 1,000th generation. And so when you look at it, 3 or 4 generations that are deserving of judgment and punishment, as opposed to 1,000 generations that he's compassionate to, it tells me that the Creator's heart, his nature, his attributes of mercy and compassion and forgiveness and restoration far outweigh his vengeance and inclination to bring judgment and destruction. Would you agree? This is where you can get involved. Do you agree with that? Was that just true for 3,500 years ago, or is it true today? I'm not winking at all the things that are going on out here. No. Trust me, in the last 2 months, things have happened in our life that every day things that well, anyway, I'm very conscious of it. Very conscious of it. To the point of, I don't see any hope. Maybe that's the place we have to get to provoke something within us to say, but you know what? As long as the baby's alive, I'm going to appeal to you for mercy. No, don't wipe them out. I'm going to stand in the gap and I'm going to appeal to you for mercy and compassion. Not because they deserve it. No, but because of who you are. Because there are people out there that hate you today, that you may have an assignment with tomorrow. Everybody still with me here? When I was growing up in South Georgia in that Pentecostal church, we were very rapture conscious. I mean, that's how we grew up. I think Baptists were kind of into that too, right? We were about the rapture. We were about getting out of here before anything bad happens. Right? I know a lot of you still are. And then in the Hebrew Roots movement, there's a lot of people who see all of this stuff crashing down around us and the world's just going to you-know-where in a handbasket. And a lot of them decided, well, we need to get out of Babylon. We need to go to Costa Rica. Or this place or that place. And it dawned on me not too long ago that there's really not a lot of difference in the mindset of let's get out of here this way versus let's get out of here this way. The mentality is still the same. We want to get out of here, which in my mind says it's all about me. It's not really about what his purposes are. It's all about me. It's about what I want. It's about what I think. It's about what I feel. It's all about me. Now, mind you, as a dad, a husband, I'm very aware that I have a responsibility to my family to make sure, regardless of what everyone else does, I have a responsibility to make sure that they're protected to the best of my ability, that they're taken care of. But I also have to be conscious of the fact that as a person, as a family, we have a responsibility to him first and foremost. And so sometimes what we want to do is not what he wants to do. Even though I like to try to convince myself that what I want to do is him telling me that's what he wants me to do. I know that none of you have ever done anything like that before. What I have found is when he is truly speaking to me and leading me, sometimes driving me into his will, I usually know it's his will because I don't want to do it. How many of you found that to be true? Now, this is all fresh in my mind, folks. Driving me into something I don't want to do. And that leads me to think, this is probably what you want me to do. And so whatever our situations, wherever we're at, we need to revisit the idea that you and I are here not just to be different, but to make a difference. And not just with this group here. We're here to make a difference with those people out there. In Exodus chapter 30, we have a Torah portion. It begins in verse 11. And I'm not going to teach on this Torah portion either necessarily, but I want to visit a couple of things that are in this Torah portion. The Torah portion is called Kitisa, and it's about taking a census. But Kitisa literally means when you elevate or when you lift up. And so when you read, you will see that biblically a census was not counting heads. In fact, David got in a lot of trouble for that. It's not about counting heads to see how many people there are. It's about counting the contributions from those who are eligible to bring one, specifically as it relates to the temple. This is getting into the half shekel. By the way, who was to bring a half shekel? Well, the rich were to bring a half shekel. The poor were to bring a half shekel. It didn't matter how much money you had, how much money you didn't have. The Creator felt that everybody can make a contribution, and He set it at a half shekel. The rich weren't required to bring more than that. The poor were not required to bring less than that. Everybody was viewed as equal in the sense that they would make a contribution to God's purposes. Even though He distinguished that there are rich and there are poor. And by the way, He didn't say to the rich, give everything to the poor against your will. But everyone is equal in His sight when it comes to making a contribution, which leads me to think that, well, some of our politicians, when something controversial comes up, and they're scared to death of what people are going to think. Have you ever noticed that there will be those who will vote present? You ever notice that? Like the other day when they were voting on the new Green Deal, there were a lot of people, we won't name any parties, Democrats, but they all voted present. Now, they were trying to make a statement. I'm not sure what it was, but they were trying to make a statement. But there are these politicians, when they don't want to go on the record as being for something or against something, and so they can just, retreat to their safety place, they'll vote present. Well, here's something that we see in the half shekel. God did not consider voting present an appropriate response. In other words, God expected everyone, rich or poor, to make a contribution to His purposes. And I hope that you're hearing what I'm saying. We're not talking about coins here. Just sitting in a chair, sitting on a pew, showing up every Shabbat and saying I'm present really isn't what the Creator's after. He is looking for all of His people to make a contribution to His purposes. Now, what we're talking about is all of this out here about to come crashing down, or is He willing to heal? And if He's willing to heal, is He going to do it unless you and I get on our face and implore Him and seek Him for mercy? Are we going to be willing to stand in the gap and say, if you're going to blot them out, blot me out too? Do we have that kind of commitment? Can we see beyond all of the things that they deserve and observe the fact that there are people out there who have no idea what's about to go on, and God is concerned for those people out there? Can we see beyond the AOCs and the Rashida Tlaibs and the whatever her name is, Ilhan Omar? Now it's hard. They make it real hard. Nancy Pelosi makes it real hard for me to see beyond that. There's some of the old Republicans that make it real hard for me to see beyond all that. But do you hear what I'm saying? We've got to quit thinking about what I want and what I prefer, and we need to start thinking about what are God's purposes here. Now, He may say the baby's dead. That might be His answer. Or if we turn our face to the wall and call out to Him, He might say, you know what, I'm going to give you 15 years more. We'll never know unless we step forward. We'll never know unless we are willing to make a contribution. The tabernacle, the purposes of the tabernacle, of course, were so that God could dwell among His people. That has always been His purpose. It remains His purpose today. I'm convinced that God would love to visit this nation, would love to be revered in this nation again. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. All right, well, those people out there are not going to lead the charge. So are we willing to make a contribution? Or are we content to just kind of isolate ourselves in our different groups and our congregations and cut ourselves off from everybody and just let Him do whatever He's going to do out there, and when He's all done with that, we'll go into the kingdom? Well, there's something about that really bothers me, and I want to read from Matthew chapter 25. Beginning in verse 14. For the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country, who called his own servants and delivered his goods to them. And to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his own ability. And immediately he went on a journey. To each according to his own ability. What that suggests to me is that some people have certain talents that others don't. Some people have gifts that I don't have. I have gifts that you don't have. God created us all in a very unique way. And it's not expected by the Creator that you and I are equal to one another in that regard, because it's just like the beam in the tabernacle has to be distinguished from the clasps in the tabernacle. The hooks have to be distinguished from the veils, because everything is designed to serve a certain purpose. And when all of those things come together and become one, then the tabernacle is one, and then it's the proper abode for the Creator. So He doesn't make us all equal in the sense that we all have the same talents, we all have the same abilities, and we all have the same position in society, or we have the same financial status. No. There are rich and poor, and it's always been that way. As a matter of fact, remember when the woman brought the spikenard of ointment and she broke it open and she used it to anoint Yeshua for his burial, He said? Remember there was a guy that got all upset about it, right? Judas, this could have been taken, the proceeds, it could have been sold, the proceeds given to the poor. Of course, he wasn't really interested in helping the poor. He was interested in lining his pockets. But the Messiah said this, and this was my point. The poor you're always going to have with you. Now, what did he mean by that? He meant the poor you're always going to have with you. No big mystery. There's always been rich, there's always been poor, there's always been the stronger, there's always been the weaker, there have always been those distinctions, male and female. And I know that this is not a politically correct topic these days, but I don't think I'm speaking to a politically correct crowd here. I am married to a very, very strong woman. Very strong. But she'll be the first to admit that she wants me to be a very strong man. She wants me to walk in my role so that she can walk in her role. And so all of this stuff about, you know, women taking over men's roles kind of, well, it kind of suggests that the Creator didn't know what he was doing and he didn't know what he was talking about. Now, ladies, before you think I'm saying that men are here to lord over you, I'm not. I'm not. And men, if you're doing that, you're going to have to answer for that, if you're not already answering for it. The ladies are not here to be our servants and our doormats. Ladies, you're not supposed to usurp the husband's authority and role. We're supposed to work together as a team. But the Creator made us male and female for a reason, because just like in the tabernacle, when everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing and they come together, male and female, husband and wife, then life is possible. Only then is life possible. And he made males typically, generally stronger than he did females. But there are things that females are much stronger than men are. My wife is a very discerning person. You know, there was a time early on in our marriage, I could have walked into a room, chairs could have been floating in the room, and I would not have noticed it. I was just like, you know. She's always been very discerning. She's always had that gift, that strength. There are things that, you know, I'm ready to give up on, and she's like, no, we're not going to give up on this. And she pushes me in that regard. So we all have our strengths and weaknesses. We all have our talents and gifts. So maybe I'm kind of beating this to death, but the idea here is, right here in verse 15, he gave one 5 talents, he gave somebody else 2 talents, and he gave to another person 1. Because he gave each according to his ability, which tells me he doesn't expect more of me than I'm capable of giving him. He doesn't put on me more than I can handle. Now, there have been many times that I pretty much thought he did just that. He put more on me than I can handle, because apparently he thought I could handle a lot more than I thought. And sometimes he kept piling it on. All right? Anyway, he gave to each according to his own ability, and immediately he went on a journey. Then he who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them and made another 5 talents. All right, the talents, by the way, is speaking, it's a value, a weight, you know, speaking of money, if you will. But he went out and he traded with them. That suggests to me that he had to go out into society and engage people. He had to kind of get involved with what was going on out there in the world, so to speak. And what I mean by that, as believers, it is a tendency that we have, because we are to be a set-apart people. We set ourselves apart and we have nothing to do with people. But again, we're not called just to be different. We're called to make a difference. And where are we called to make a difference at? In what's going on out here. So he traded. He made another 5 talents, and likewise he who had received 2 gained 2 more also. But he who had received 1 went and dug in the ground and hid his Lord's money. And after a long time the Lord of those servants came and settled accounts with them. So he who had received 5 talents came and brought 5 other talents, saying, Lord, you delivered to me 5 talents. Look, I have gained 5 more talents besides them. And his Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of the Lord, of your Lord. He also, who had received 2 talents, came and said, Lord, you delivered to me 2 talents. Look, I've gained 2 more talents besides them. His Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Then he who had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown, gathering where you have not scattered. And I was afraid and went and hid your talent in the ground. Look, there you have what is yours. So here's what I want to point out before we go on. I knew you to be a hard man. His perception of his Lord is he is a hard, hardened person. He expects to reap even though he has not put the work into it by sowing. In other words, he expects to get something for nothing. You gather where you have not scattered seed. Just kind of saying the same thing. Without going out and doing the work, without actually investing anything, you expect a reward. That's how he perceives his Lord to be. So let me stop and ask this question. Do we perceive our Lord to be one who does not invest anything and yet expects a reward? Who hasn't invested anything in this whole idea of human history and what it's all about and why he created the earth? Did he just expect that you and I were going to do all the work because he hasn't done anything? He's just that kind of a person, or he's that kind of a creator? No. Okay. In other words, this servant has an egregious misconception of who he serves. He sees him one way, and that one way is the wrong way. Let's go back to Exodus chapter 34. The Lord God, abundant in goodness and truth, merciful, compassionate, long-suffering, in no wise allowing the guilty to go unpunished, visiting the iniquity unto the 3rd and the 4th generation, but extending mercy to those who love me and keep my commandments, according to Deuteronomy, unto the 1000th generation. How should we perceive our Lord? Merciful? How about this side? How should we perceive him? When all this stuff is swirling around us, how do we perceive him? How do we perceive him when we see all of these things going on in the world? Now, mind you, it's corrupt. It's festering. It's rotten. And yet, how should he be perceived? If you're willing, you can heal me. I am willing. Sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is yes. But the point I want to make here is it's very important that we do not have a misconception about who we serve and what his heart is. And I guess what I'm trying to say is this. If we had been Moses and this generation had been Israel and they had just done what Israel had done, and God spoke to you and said, step out of the way, I'm going to wipe them all out, I'm going to raise up a nation from you. How many of you would have stood there and pleaded for these people who make you sick to your stomach? Or how many of you would have been just willing to step aside and let him wipe them out? And I say that because, let's face it, with all the disgusting things that are going on in our culture and the world today, it is our tendency, I believe. I know I struggle with it. It's our tendency to just step aside and say, God, just take them out. But is that his heart? or is that mine? So then, he had the wrong idea about his master. And he says, I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Is that what he was giving it? Is that why he gave it? No. It was intended that he invest it, use it, put it to work, so that he gets a return on his investment. Look, there you have what is yours. I would suggest to you that that is similar to or synonymous with taking a light and hiding it under the bed. Because a light might attract attention to me, and there are things out there in the dark I don't want coming around my house. So I'm going to take the light, and I'm going to let those who are in darkness remain in darkness. I've got my light here. That's all I need. But what does Yeshua say? No, you take that light and you put it on the lampstand. Why? So that everybody can see it. And everybody means everybody. Everybody means those people who hate us, those people who want to persecute us, those people who would rather us be dead than alive, especially those people. Those are the ones that we have to engage. Those are the ones who need the light. But this servant says, no, I didn't want to do that. I was afraid. I was intimidated. I just wanted to, I had this conception about you, about how you are, and I just went and hid your money. Here it is. But his Lord answered and said to him, you wicked and lazy servant. Lazy kind of goes without saying. But wicked. You wicked and lazy servant. You knew what I reap where I have not sown, and gather where I have not scattered seed. So you ought to have deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received back my own with interest. Now, I'm reading it that way because I want to suggest to you that the Messiah was not saying the Lord agreed with this servant. He was just saying, well, if you thought I was that way, then why did you not at least go do this? Therefore, take the talent from him and give it to him who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have abundance. But from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. Another word that we could use here for unprofitable is useless. Cast the useless servant into outer darkness. Why? Because he was not only lazy, but he was wicked. We need to understand that wickedness, biblically speaking, is not limited to devil worshipers, baby killers, abortionists, and those kinds. Yes, that is wicked. But anything that is not serving God's purposes, technically speaking, is wicked. Because it is, whether we intend it or not, when we refrain from serving His purpose, we are saying, I know better. And that's just another way of saying, I rebel. It is rebellion when we come against or refuse to walk in His purposes. Let me put it to you this way. What happens to a fig tree that's got all these leaves put out there, but when the Messiah comes up and gets real close and starts to inspect it for fruit and he doesn't find any, what becomes of that fig tree? What? It's cursed. It dries up from the root, right? So how does he feel about not bearing any kind of fruit? It's not just a slap on the wrist, ladies and gentlemen. It's worthless. What happens to salt that's lost its saltiness? It's not serving its purpose anymore. What happens to it? It's good for nothing. It's useless. It's tossed out into the street and it's trampled underfoot. There is a parable in Luke where a man has a fig tree and it hasn't produced any fruit for several years, and he's ready to rip it up out of the ground and get it out of the way. It's just taking up space. But he has a servant that says, no, let's do this. Let's work with it just a little while longer. Come on. Let's work with it just a little while longer. Let me get in here and I'll fertilize it and I'll dig around it and I'll work with it. And let's just see if we can get this tree to grow some fruit. And if it still won't produce any fruit, then you can do whatever you feel like needs to be done. Do you hear what I'm saying? Where are those servants? Where are those who are willing to say, I know that they deserve everything you want to do? For that matter, so do I. But I want to stand in the gap, and I want to plead, because you are compassionate, you are merciful, you are long-suffering, not willing that any should perish. You are willing to forgive. You are willing to restore, because you're not the God of death, you're the God of the living. And I'm going to appeal to you for mercy for the sake of people who don't really deserve it, but because that's who you are. I want to stand in the gap. Let's work with this a little while longer. I'll do it. I'll water it. I'll dig. I'll put forth effort. I won't be lazy. I'll do everything I know to do. Let's just work with it a little while longer. What do you think? Cast the unprofitable servant out into outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. There's a lot of different things that we can read into that parable, I guess. But here's where I'm going to go with it. Going back to the idea that a census in the Bible was not counting heads. It was counting the contribution the people made. And when the people made a contribution, now please don't read money into that. Everybody has a gift. Everybody has a talent. Everyone has strengths. Everyone has connections. Everyone has something. Big or small, rich or poor, everyone has something that we can contribute to His purposes. This is not about making America great again. This is about provoking America to turn back to the one who made us great in the first place. This is about His purposes. And not just for a nation. More importantly, I would say it's about for Joe and Sue and Donna and Michael and all these different men and women and children out here that His heart still yearns for, that have no idea what's getting ready to happen. Those are the purposes that I'm talking about. That's why I'm saying we need to work with this fig tree just a little while longer. Let me work with it. Let me stand in the gap. Let me appeal to your mercy and compassion to hold back just a little while. Don't leave us. Please let your presence go with us. So, this idea that everyone has a contribution they can make. Biblically, it was understood that when everybody made their contributions, then the whole nation benefited. In fact, that's what's hinted at when it says, when you elevate, kitisa, when you elevate. When you make your contribution and you're making yours and you're making yours, then everyone as a whole is going to benefit. A gentleman that I've been acquainted with, or just become acquainted with here recently, likes to put it this way: rising tides float all boats. Everyone will benefit when everyone is doing what the Creator has given them to do. Everyone will benefit when when we are using the talents and the gifts that the Creator has given to us. I was reading in the book of Revelation, chapter 3, the other day, and something I've seen in a different way, in a different context. But it jumped out at me the other day and in a different way. And that is that when he was speaking to the congregation of Philadelphia, he saw that they had little strength. They were worn down, I guess you'd say. But he said, But you've not denied my word. You've kept my word, and you haven't denied my name. You haven't denied my authority. And so I'm going to keep you. I'm going to keep you in that day of adversity that's coming upon the whole world. And I'm paraphrasing this. And then he says, I have set before you an open door. No man can shut it. Which means only the Creator can shut it. So if there is an open door, if there is an opportunity, and it's before us, then perhaps the Creator is the one who's opened that door. Meaning that only the Creator will be able to shut it. Now, that would imply something else. There will come a time when He will shut it. And once He shut it, nobody can open it. Which in my mind connected to something we read about in the book of Genesis. For at least 100 years, a man by the name of Noah and his family were building a boat. They were building a ship. They knew stuff was coming. They knew that there was going to be things that happened, and it was going to be very destructive, and there was going to be many who perished. But for all that time, at least we assume, because he was a preacher of righteousness, that Noah was reaching out to that generation. Even as he was building the ark, even as he was doing these things, he was reaching out to that generation. And after they were finished, and it doesn't tell us exactly when, as it relates to the flood, when they had finished, but it makes a point of saying that when they went into the ark, when they finally received the command to go into the ark, and they went in, and all the animals were in, that God shut the door. And so in my mind, what I'm trying to say here is this, that I believe that there is a door open right now. I believe that there is an opportunity that is presented to us. I believe that we are coming out of one season into another. And I don't know how long that season's going to last, but I feel like winds have changed. And maybe for a little while they'll prevail in our favor, because I believe that there's going to be another push by the Spirit of God to reach out to these people in this generation. And I say that because I do believe bad stuff is coming. I believe that. I mean, there's no way to get around that. The Scripture describes that when the Messiah rules and reigns, all the nations will bow to Him. The kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our God and of His Christ. That's definite. That is going to happen. There are no exemptions from that. And so eventually all nations, all kingdoms, all kings, all presidents will have to bow to the fact that He is restoring the kingdom to Israel. The Messiah will return to rule and to reign from Jerusalem. Again, that is definite. But leading up to that, there's still all of these people in all these different nations, including this one, that He's still going to try to reach out to. And I believe that there is a door open. For how long, I don't know. Here's why I believe it. And you can chastise me about this later if you want to. I'm leaving in the morning, so I don't guess it really matters. There are certain people in Congress. There are certain people in this culture, and you know it. If they could, they would shut you up, they would shut you down, and if they could get away with it, they would snuff you out. It's becoming very obvious that it's no longer a matter of we disagree with one another. It's a matter of they want to shut you down and stamp us out. Do you see that? If they could, they would do it. Right now, they can't go that far just yet. Because whether we like it or not, God's ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. And He does things that make me pull my hair out. That's why it's loose. That's why it's going. And I believe that we've been given an opportunity. There are those that are in power that are, strange as it may sound, willing to fight on our behalf. In fact, I've kind of come to the place of believing that the reason that God is using some of these very strange and awkward people to fight on our behalf is to shame us, because we haven't been willing. We've just been kind of willing to kind of hole up in our groups and our congregations and fish in our pond year after year after year, isolate ourselves and take that light and just stick it under the bed and just say, God, do whatever you're going to do. Bring it all down. Get me out of here. Get me out of here. Or let's just walk. I realize that there's exceptions, but generally speaking, that's what's been going on for a long time. And the evidence of that is the fact that we now have 2 Muslims in the halls of Congress, and it won't stop there, folks. And we're not just talking about, moderate Muslims. We're talking about those who hate you, they hate Israel, and they make no bones about it. That's the toe in the door. So imagine if that was what was prevailing in the halls of Congress right now. Imagine if that was what was prevailing on the Supreme Court right now. Imagine if that was in the White House, and imagine if it all happened at the same time. That's what's going to happen if we sit on our hands and aren't willing to make a contribution. Not money. We have been intimidated into silence. We bought into the idea that we're not supposed to say anything. We're just, whatever we're going to say it in here. We're not supposed to take it out there. Baloney. There are other words I can think of, but I'm in the church, so I won't say those words. I was just going to say bull hockey, anyway. Nothing real bad. I guess I said it anyway. All right. We've been intimidated into silence, into thinking that we're not supposed to say anything. Look, when God put that garden and planted it in Eden, He could have tended the garden Himself. He could have protected the garden and guarded it against the adversary, but He didn't do that. What did He do? He invested that responsibility in the man. And by the way, when the man didn't guard or keep the garden, what happened? The serpent got in the middle of it. And God didn't stop that from happening, did He? He allowed the man and the woman to pay the consequences of them not doing what they were supposed to do in the first place. So when we look around at all the things that are going on in our world, it's really easy for us, and again, I'm saying this in a general way. I'm not talking about this congregation necessarily, but just as God's people, we just think that God, you just let happen whatever you want to happen. Whatever happens, you've got it all under control. We're not supposed to be involved. We're just going to sit here and wait till the kingdom comes. That's what got Adam and the woman kicked out of the garden in the first place. In Haggai chapter 2, the people are coming back from Babylonian captivity. And by the way, why did they go into Babylonian captivity? Because they didn't do what they were supposed to do. They didn't defend what God had invested in them and given them. They didn't continue to turn to Him. They just kind of got lazy about things. Wickedness began to fester in their heart. And so that's why they went into Babylonian captivity. And when they came back from that captivity, you can read about this in Haggai chapter 2, they're looking at this broken down, destroyed temple, that they had so revered, that meant so much to them, that was something was very important to them as a nation, because when it was working the way it was supposed to be working, God's presence was there, and God was dwelling in and among His people, and that was the ideal from the very beginning. And so He says to them, look at the way it is now, how it's all broken down, it's rubble, it's a heap, and then think about what it used to be. How many of you are old enough to remember how the temple looked before? This is in Haggai 2. And then he says this, because he's trying to get them to think. It used to be glorious. Now it's dust and rubble. You allow this to happen. So look at it. Now, if you will do the work, know that I'm with you. Just as certainly as I was with you when I brought you out of Egypt and I brought you into this land, in that same manner, I am with you today. But you do the work. That's what he said. So I'm going to throw this out. You can do with it what you wish. I have no idea how long I've been talking. I'm looking at my country right now. And it's broken. It's dilapidated. It's corrupt. And all that corruption and wickedness has festered to the surface. And so we're getting to see all of it now. And I'm remembering what it was supposed to be, what it was envisioned to be. When John Winthrop, who would eventually serve as one of the governors of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, that would be Salem and Boston and Gloucester up there in the New England area, on the on the deck of the ship Arbella, he wrote a little booklet, I guess that's the best word, about Christian charity, and I'm going to paraphrase him there. He says that we believe that we have been given a commission to establish a colony, and God's handiwork, we've seen his intervention to make it where we can establish our own charter. We can make it to be whatever we envision it to be. I'm paraphrasing here. And we have entreated the Lord to enter into covenant with us for this task. And we are convinced that he has entered into covenant with us. And he goes on to list the reasons and different things that happened that convinced them that God had said, yes, I'll enter into covenant with you. And so we believe that our commission as we establish this colony is to do as the prophet Micah prescribed, and that is to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly before our God. And we are convinced that if we were to do that, that the God of Israel is with us, and that he will build us into a shining city on a hill. But we also know, because he has entered into covenant with us, there's a great responsibility to be faithful to that covenant. Should we fail in this, should we turn our face away from him, then we will become a byword and a parable among the nations, quoting Moses. My point in all this is, those people at the very beginning saw this as God entering into covenant with them to build something that was unique and different. And I believe that he did enter into covenant with them. And I do believe that those principles and those concepts established and built something that has been unique in the nations of the world. In fact, I am convinced there's only been 2 unique nations in the history of the world. The first one is Israel, because God asked them to enter into covenant with them at the foot of the mountain, and they said, whatever the Lord says, we will hear and we will do. And he made covenant with them. And the fact that there is still a place called Israel today tells me that in spite of their unfaithfulness, he is faithful. He doesn't break covenant. The other nation, I believe, is this nation. Not because he asked us to enter into covenant with him, but because we pleaded with him to enter into covenant with us. And because he doesn't break covenant, I'm going to suggest to you that he has not broken covenant. We did. We turned our face away. So what happens if we go to a God who never breaks covenant, who's long-suffering, merciful, compassionate? And what if we begin to entreat him for mercy and compassion. And we recall to him our fathers and what they did and how they trusted in him and how he bestowed benefits upon them, how he intervened on their behalf for his purposes. What happens if we start recounting some of those things? What happens if we start calling those things out again? He hasn't forgotten. He knows. But every time he was moved with compassion and mercy, it was because his people got to the point of saying, remember us. Remember our fathers. We're calling out to you. We're desperate. We have no other recourse. Maybe a lot of this that's going on out here, folks, God is allowing it to touch us all, to bring us to the place to see whether or not it's within us to call out to him, not on my behalf, but on their behalf. Because when I stand before him, I don't want to have to say, all that you invested in me, I just went and buried it in the backyard waiting for you to return. Because I don't want to hear him say, you're a wicked and lazy servant. You totally misjudged who and what I am. I don't want to hear that.
Amen.
What I want to hear is, well done, good and faithful servant. Sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is yes. But we'll never know unless we get up off of our backside and we start making a contribution of our gifts, our talents, our voices to his purposes. And when he answers and when he speaks and when he makes a decision, blessed be the name of the Lord. Amen?
Amen.
Shabbat shalom. God bless.